So, one of the biggest talking points going into the 2024 season is the question of whether or not the Oklahoma Sooners will find success in their first year in the SEC. And this is something we've talked about several times on lives, but I figured it's time to make a dedicated video on the matter. And in fact, when you look at the Oklahoma Sooners coaching staff, there's no question that they've assembled an impressive staff. When you look at what Brent Venables has been able to do on the recruiting trail as well as the transfer portal, he's been able to acquire top talent. And today, we need to ask and answer the question, will Oklahoma shock people in their first year in the SEC? Before we can, as always, I've got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes, N for no, and same question. Do you believe the Oklahoma Sooners are going to shock people in their first year in the SEC? And let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And one of the things I've talked about time and time again is that Brent Venables has not only recruited to an SEC standard where he's been able to get top 10 class after top 10 class, not only in high school acquisition, but in transfer portal acquisitions as well. But when you look at this coaching staff, it's a really solid coaching staff. You have Todd Bates as your defensive line coach. You have a new defensive coordinator who I'm really excited about. When we look at the offensive side, Bill Bedenbaugh, in my opinion, is the best offensive line coach in the nation. But if you don't agree, I don't think there's any argument that would put him outside the top 5. I just don't see how you would argue that he isn't a top 5 offensive line coach when you look at how many guys he's sent to the NFL, how those guys are just getting contract after contract, and how year after year he figures out that offensive line. They have DeMarco Murray as a running back coach who's constantly able to get big wins on the recruiting trail for top running backs, both in terms of high school recruiting and in terms of transfer portal acquisitions. And Emmett Jones, their wide receiver coach, in my opinion, is one of the gems in college football. He's a guy that on the national stage I don't think gets the recognition he deserves, but he is a fantastic wide receiver coach. One, I think is going to make a name for himself, and I think everybody will know about him sooner rather than later, no pun intended. So when you look at the coaching staff, it's there. But the SEC is a different league. It is different than the Big 12. It is a bit more physical than the Big 12, and that's where I talked about the recruiting in the intro to this video, because Brent Venables has recruited with this move in mind. He has been recruiting, trying to get physical players that are going to be able to make that transition successfully and to be able to put Oklahoma in a position to be successful year one in the SEC. So let's break this down. Let's talk about it. How will the Oklahoma Sooners fare in their first year in a brand new conference? When we look at what Vegas projects, Vegas sees them having 7.5 wins, and I must say I think they're going to go over that. Listen, I don't think Oklahoma is going to win the SEC in their first year. I think this year is going to be a very competitive year in the SEC. I think it may cannibalize itself, and this is something I've maintained for quite some time. But I do believe the Oklahoma Sooners are going to shock people, especially if you have their win total at 7.5, because I think there's some really interesting pieces on this team, and we're going to break it all down. I've said this before. I think the Oklahoma Sooners are looking at a 9 to 10 win season. And if they're able to hit 9 wins, that's going to be very impressive. The one thing that Oklahoma has that did them a little bit of a disservice was an incredibly difficult schedule. So let's take a look at this. What does Oklahoma return on offense? What do they return on defense? And where do they rank in terms of returning talent across the board? And if we look, they're 67th overall in returning talent across the board, offense and defense. When we look at their returning defensive production, they're 8th in the nation and number 1 in the SEC. And this is very important. Oklahoma's defense has some pieces that came back that are going to be massive for this season. Danny Stutzman coming back, instantly a leader. Billy Bowman coming back. That's going to be huge for that secondary, a secondary that if you ask Oklahoma fans, they're very excited about. And if you just dive into the numbers, that secondary is interesting. Last year, they ranked number 77 in the nation in pass defense, but when you look at team passing efficiency, they were number 17 in team defense passing efficiency. So it's a very interesting conversation when we look at that secondary. They had some injuries, but they have got some very talented pieces within that secondary. Bowman coming back only grants them more continuity at the position, and that's massive. We talk about that all the time, that continuity is exactly what you're after. So, in the defensive backfield, I think most Oklahoma fans are very excited about what they're going to field this year, and I think deservedly so. From a linebacker perspective, that's probably where I'm the most excited for Oklahoma. You look at the linebackers Oklahoma has, and I think there are some really talented names. Danny Stutzman coming back once again is massive, but who is going to be that second guy? Will it be Kanik? Will it be Kip Lewis, who, by the way, might be one of my favorite players on this entire Oklahoma roster? That's what I'm fascinated to see once fall camp gets here. We've seen time and time again things get shaken up during spring, and once again they get shaken up during fall camp. But one thing I do know is that Danny Stutzman is going to be the guy, and he's going to have a very talented running mate. That is not in question. When we look at the defensive line, yes, there's some very talented pieces, but I really like what Brent Venables did whenever he went out and got Dominic Williams. Understanding, hey, I've got talent on the defensive line, but I don't have the experience that I would like, and I need to get that. So he goes out and gets one of the top defensive linemen available in the transfer portal. Depending on where you look, he was the number 1 or number 2 available defensive lineman in that transfer portal class, which was the spring window. Love that. Now, the biggest question I have for Oklahoma's defense, are you going to have a pass rush? This is something that I think will take that Oklahoma defense to the next level, is will you be able to generate a pass rush? And if they're able to do that, then I think Oklahoma's defense is going to be much more successful. We've talked about this time and time again. Generating a pass rush, whether it comes from the edge, from your pass rushers, or from the interior, that matters not. It helps your secondary, and this is already a secondary that Oklahoma fans are excited about, but now if you're able to consistently put pressure on the quarterback, that's just going to take it to the next level. And to answer the question, Oklahoma has some very talented pass rushers, and I'm excited to see them take the next step in their development. But let's transition to the offensive side, because this is where Oklahoma is last in the SEC, and it's kind of the tale of two tapes, right? You've got the defense, which is first in the SEC in returning production, and the offense, which is last in the SEC in returning production. We can talk about the offensive line, and I have before. If I'm asking what's my biggest question for Oklahoma, it would be the offensive line. But every time I say that, I must follow it with the following statement. They have Bill Bedenbaugh. And every time someone questions, is your offensive line going to be good? He answers with an emphatic yes. I'm not saying they win the Joe Moore every single year, but he figures it out and he puts them in positions of success time and time again. So until he gives me a reason not to believe in him, I give him the benefit of the doubt. That's just the way this goes. He's done it for far too long. I give Bill Bedenbaugh the benefit of the doubt. So even though that may be my biggest question, there's instantly an answer to that question. When we look at the running back room, yeah, you lose Tawee Walker, and Tawee Walker was a very solid piece, but when you look top to bottom, there's a lot of talent in this running back room. Gavin Sawchuk, really talented. You still have Khalib Hicks, you have Barnes, and you get in a very talented transfer in Franklin, who I'm very excited to see. Plus, DeMarco Murray is at the helm of that running back room, and he has been a really solid running back coach. Quarterback, Dillon Gabriel is no longer there. You have Jackson Arnold. Now, Jackson Arnold may not have the experience of Dillon Gabriel, but I think he's got a higher ceiling. One thing we have to acknowledge is that this guy is a dual-threat quarterback that can hurt you with his legs, he can hurt you with his arm, and he's going to have a new offensive coordinator in Seth Luttrell, who, in my opinion, may not have the flashy offense that Jeff Lebby had, but it's going to be a methodical offense. And for a young quarterback, maybe that's a good thing. I'm really excited to see what this offense looks like transitioning from Lebby to Luttrell. When we look at the wide receiver room, I think this is another area where I think people get this wrong. And not Oklahoma fans, because I actually side with you on this. I think Oklahoma has one of the best wide receiving units in the entirety of college football. Yes, we can talk about how they lose Stoops, and Stoops was a big piece for this Oklahoma wide receiver room. You're not going to hear an argument from me on that. That's just the truth. But they still have Andrell Anthony. They still have Jaleel Farouk. They have got Deion Burks, who they got out the transfer portal, Jaden Gibson, Anderson. They have Petaway. I mean, this wide receiver room is absolutely stacked, and if the offensive line can give their new quarterback time to stand and process, he's going to be able to find someone. He's going to be able to find a playmaker. And a lot of these playmakers for Oklahoma are not short guys. They're 6'3" plus. That right there is going to make it very difficult to defend them in the red zone. So when we look at Oklahoma, do I think that they're going to be able to win the SEC year one? I don't believe so. And that's not to say that I don't think that they're going to be successful. I think they're going to be very successful. In fact, I think a lot of people are writing off Oklahoma as going under the 7.5 wins that Vegas has projected. I think they will go over the 7.5 wins that Vegas has projected. I think that the core of the team is there, and I think it's very good. I think that the coaching staff is very good, and I think that Brent Venables has been moving with this move to the SEC in mind, with everything he does. The last room we need to talk about is tight end, and along with offensive line, that's probably my other big question. They did some work getting in some tight ends, but I'm really interested to see the usage of the position go up for the Sooners. One of the things I've talked about ad nauseum here on the channel is that great tight end play, great running back play can be a new quarterback's best friend. And I know a lot of people are going to point to the Arizona game for Jackson Arnold, and I know half the people are going to say bowl games don't matter. I don't 100% buy into that. Right? You have to remember, I'm someone who has the executive director of bowl season on my channel, and I see how some of these teams look at bowl games. They matter. They might not matter like they used to, but they matter. But just because the bowl game matters does not mean that Jackson Arnold's performance in it is the end-all be-all. That was his first time as a starter against a very good Arizona team. And I think that's the thing that people don't realize or even want to admit is that Arizona team was really, really good. Jay from Unfair Sports and I talked about that at length. I don't think that one game is indicative of how good or bad Jackson Arnold will be. And I think anybody using that as the end-all be-all, I think they're doing so disingenuously. Because we've seen fantastic quarterbacks have a tough time in their first start. A freshman quarterback making freshman mistakes is not going to set the alarm bells off in my head. It's just not. I'm sorry. We've seen it too many times. But Jackson Arnold now has that game that he can learn from. And learning from those type of games, that's powerful. So I'm very interested to see what the Oklahoma Sooners do in their first year in the SEC. I already gave you how I think they're going to do. I think we're looking at about a 9-win season for Oklahoma because the SEC did them no favors. Outside of Florida, they have the most difficult schedule within the SEC. I'd give Florida number 1 because I don't know what they have on Billy Napier, but they have something and they do not like him. But Oklahoma as well has a very difficult schedule. But I will say this. I think they are going to shock people because I think people have wrote them off, and I think that's a bad idea. Hop down to the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.